I recently had a chance to sit down and look at the Star Wars Ragtag story again and get a closer look at what actually happened in it. The information in this video is based on having read the actual game's pitch, parts of its script, lots of concept art, and lots of reports that I received over the years. Ragtag was ultimately a story about revenge, and maybe justified revenge. The protagonist was to avenge his fallen mentor, return home to avenge his home planet, and stop a nefarious plan to create a weapon that would have dire consequences if it was in the hands of the Empire. I want to apologize about the quality of the images, but beggars can't be choosers. These were leaked to me over the years in various different ways, and there's nothing I can do about it, but you can get kind of a glance at what most of the characters would have looked like and how the game kind of would have felt in its general vibe. The main protagonist was a dude named Dodger, and he was a 40-ish human male, described as a fast-talking charmer, and he used a pistol, and he also had a lot of variants in his weaponry. Like one was like a light whip that he would use in a grappling weapon, and I have a lot of images of those weapons, and I'm not sure if all of those were to be used by Dodger or if these were different designs for what it could be. If these were pitches, it's not quite clear. And with the game having changed its development so many times, it's really hard to say for certain. But as you can see here, we have about 8 different variants in his pistol. And, these could be upgrades. A lot of the handles look very similar, so these might have been upgradable throughout the game. But once again, it's just not clear. Here you can see the different front view effects of the actual whip when it's in use. The whip itself seems to have taken a design cue that was based off of having maybe hacked or used various parts from other classic Star Wars weapons. I mean, you could just see Biker Scout pistols, and you could see DL-44 parts in a lot of these handles. Some of them are even using old lightsaber parts, which in Galaxy might be kind of hard to justify, but it was a pretty fun concept either way. Some of these weapons, like the quad shotgun, aren't really clear if they were for Dodger explicitly or if other team members would have used it too. But with that in mind, here you just kind of get an example of what they were going for with these kinds of weapons. And I think we kind of have seen these in other Star Wars games since. One of my favorite things that I saw was the ability to use the whip to actually be dragged by a bantha down the street of Mos Eisley. And there was going to be a lot of interactive environmental play with the whip itself. If you play Fortnite, you might be aware that people sometimes use the grappling hook weapon to pull you to them and then to shotgun you. That was essentially going to be a vital part of Dodger's gameplay from what I understand. And then here we can see that they toyed with this concept of using a carbonite gun so that they could basically freeze you into carbonite and then blast you and turn you into little pieces of rock and marble. Here you could also see the shock rod, which is basically a stun baton that really seemed to play on a lot of the concepts that were already laid out with the whip itself. So I'm not sure if this was going to evolve as a weapon or if these were just general pitches as weapons for Dodger to use. But we'll get more into Dodger's story and who he was as we get into the tale itself. But really quickly, let's break down the rest of the general cast of the game. Buck Freeborn is described as being in his early 70s, a human male, a veteran scoundrel. Buck has been running with this crew of scoundrels for the last 20 years, collecting orphans and training them like an intergalactic Fagin. In his autumn years, Buck had a crisis of conscience after the Battle of Yavin and has secretly joined the rebellion. You could kind of think of Buck as a mashup between Beckett from Solo: A Star Wars Story and Mother Proxima, which was also a rumor at the time that some of this game was stepping on Solo's toes. Roby Maddox, 30-ish human female. She's the Sundance to Dodger's Butch, our co-protagonist. She's a gunslinger with a dry, laconic attitude. She was orphaned as a young girl and raised on Coruscant by the Wandering Star Crime family at level 1313. Roby has a phobia about droids that creep her out. And by all accounts, if I take these notes that I've read seriously, Roby would have been the main character in the sequel to Star Wars Ragtag. Unfortunately, the magic of her character was in her interactions with Dodger, and we don't really have a lot of the script for that stuff that I could put out. At one point, all of the concept art for Roby had Natalie Morales' face plastered over it, which leads me to believe that Natalie Morales was likely cast in the role, but it's not 100% confirmed. Doc is the Cruz Droid. She's a RAN Rebel Field Medic droid heisted by Dodgers sometime in the past. She's an astromech that travels on a large rolling ball encased in a vaguely cylindrical body based on Ralph McQuarrie's original R2 sketch, which they also used for BB-8. Her dome-shaped head assembly can detach and fly independently from the body and base. She would fulfill the healing role in the game. Lennox. He would be in his 50s in human years. He's the burly alien mechanic on Dodger's ship. He's a Gudon, a new race, with a thick body of a retired boxer and the head of a manatee. He speaks an alien language and wears a universal translator, so that way he could speak English to you. And really quickly, here are some concepts of Lennox guns throughout the game. Will Nightstar, a fellow scoundrel, friend of Dodger and Buck in his late 30s, human male, Dodger's longtime friend and old partner in crime. Will is a dashing, charming scoundrel with a dark secret. One note of interest is that some iterations of the character had the surname Darklighter, like Luke Skywalker's childhood buddy Biggs Darklighter, but a twist in the story makes me think that might have just been a placeholder, or at one time in the story he told people his name was Darklighter and then Nightstar is his real last name. Zanny sounds like one of the most fun characters in the game. Zanny was a Force-sensitive charlatan with no Jedi Order and guidance. He uses the Force to cheat, steal, and be a successful criminal. Zanny is in his late 30s and is an ANZAT, a Force-sensitive charlatan. He uses his nascent powers for financial gain via street cons and trickery. He's petty, he's a crook, he's sneaky, and he's an oily character whom Dodger detests. Despite his misgivings, Dodger needs his help, and Zanny joins the group, but ultimately finds his higher calling. Ananda Serena is a Baldemiro underboss and Chantus. Behind these two big guys, she might be holding these guns, which were concepts for her to use in the game. And then we have Major General Pilaf, a Clone War era officer, and his droid Isaac, IZK, a reprogrammed super battle droid and best friend to Pilaf. And here we may be looking at the only look at Isaac that I've ever seen, which is the test of this weapon being fired. And I think that's him, but I'm not 100% sure. Corzine Sable. She's the main antagonist of Ragtag. She's about 50 years old and a Ring underboss who has gone rogue and starts a turf war with the Hutts. She secretly has an Imperial contract with the Tarkin Initiative. Corzine is somewhat of a climber in the organization, and her activities and her collusion with the Empire aren't really looked at or endorsed favorably by the Brain Clan itself, but she has her own flagship, which is noted as being a deep space vessel. And then we have Una Sable. She's the daughter of Corzine. She's rich, spoiled, and beautiful. Una is initially a pawn in the turf war between the crime families. She's wealthy, pampered, and trained in, quote, rich girl sports. Her inner scoundrel is awoken midway through the story. In a lot of the concept art, Jillian Jacobs from Community is featured as the actor they chose to depict, but it's not clear if Jacobs was cast or if the concept artist just favored drawing her. Her costume reminds me of a cross between a 1960s Batman villain and a vinyl-caped Princess Leia from 1977. Ring foot soldiers would have been the primary enemies and the thugs that work for Corzine. These types of guys would have been the enemies we would have seen throughout most of the game. But I don't think they were going to get Robert De Niro to play a Ring foot soldier in the game. Here's the information that would have comprised the opening crawl, essentially, if there had been one. The game is set after A New Hope and just before The Empire Strikes Back, with the story heavily influenced by the events and climax of A New Hope. The obliteration of Alderaan and the subsequent destruction of the Death Star is what the story was built upon. The Empire is clamping down on the Outer Rim where the Rebel attack originated. This conflict has bled into the world of the scoundrels. Some choose to profiteer, others use their meager means to aid the rebellion, while a few strive to remain neutral in the conflict. The Empire has tightened its grip on the galaxy, clamping down and occupying the Outer Rim territories, which is sending ripples throughout the crime world. Some crime families are profiting, while others take less kindly to the increased Imperial attention. The Rain Clan, a powerful syndicate based on Coruscant, has used its relationship with the Empire to muscle their way onto Tatooine. From within the Rain Clan, an ambitious underboss named Corzine Sable leads the rogue faction against the Hutts. Now let's dig into how the story would have unfolded. Our story begins on Tatooine. When we first meet Dodger and Roby, they are stealing a speeder. Here are some of the storyboards and how that may have played out. Roby and Dodger then speed away to their meeting with Jabba the Hutt at Mos Eisley. Jabba senses a power play coming from the Rain clan and concocts a plan to halt Corzine's advances on Tatooine. Jabba calls upon a local scoundrel, Dodger Boone, and his partner, Roby Maddox, into kidnapping Corzine's daughter, Una Sable. Dodger needs the credits and the contact to acquire a new identity. Dodger has to operate under an assumed identity, and he needs enough money to buy his name off an Imperial list. Thus, the need for a big score that can allow him to buy his liberty. After some coercion by Jabba, Dodger and Roby agree to take the job. Jabba the Hutt sees Una as a bargaining chip to expel Corzine's operations from Tatooine, and to take Corzine's secret Imperial contracts from the Rain clan and acquire them for the Hutts. Dodger and Roby find themselves smack in the middle of a turf war between the Hutts and the Rain clan. It appears Una is kidnapped by Dodger and Roby from an Imperial mansion. How the mansion and the kidnapping play out is still a little bit murky, but here you can see some concept art for the level and how that mansion would have looked. After turning Una over to Jabba, aboard Dodger's ship, a call comes in from Buck. We learn that Buck is Dodger's old mentor, and he resides in Mos El-Rey. And Buck seems desperate. To Dodger's surprise, Buck tries to recruit Dodger into a black bag operation on Zyberez, a floating pleasure palace frequented by the rich and powerful. The rebels need Buck and Dodger to gather intel on a secret meeting between Corzine and the Empire. Dodger balks at the suggestion. We learn that, as a survivor of Alderaan, Dodger has no love for the Empire, but also blames the rebels for putting his homeworld into the crosshairs in the first place. Buck had always taught him to stay neutral, quote, "Let the fools kill each other, stay out of it, stay alive," end quote. And Dodger believes these rules are crucial for survival in the Outer Rim. Dodger is a survivor of Alderaan. He left home on bad terms at age 17 to escape the Imperial draft, thus his nickname. He took up with Buck and became a scoundrel. Suddenly, there is heavy commotion on the call, and the call is cut short. Dodger races to Mos El-Rey. Mos El-Rey is a small desert village set in the canyon below the plains. The homes are built into the canyon walls, with entrances leading to and from the plain's surface. This is Buck Freeborn's home and base of operation, and essentially where Dodger grew up. Dodger walks into the settlement to find it in utter chaos. What Dodger doesn't know is that the settlement was targeted as a testing ground for a new weapon that Corzine is developing with the Tarkin Initiative, a secret division of the Empire dedicated to the research and development of new weapons of mass destruction. The Empire's AT-STs attack Mos El-Rey, and the inhabitants attempt to fight back. However, a weapon never seen before is used on the entire population. A purple violaceous gas shoots from the canisters at the rebelling population. Dodger is unaffected, a little weakened by the gas, but he watches as the entire village, including Buck, the recently exposed rebel agitator, are transformed into fragile, calcified statues, frozen in terror for eternity. The people are dead, but the location is left intact and their possessions remain undamaged and salvageable by the Empire. When released, the heavy gas rolls rapidly through the environment, and all living matter is petrified upon its touch. Dodger, a survivor of Alderaan, has now seen his family killed by the Empire again, by a new weapon as grotesque as the Death Star itself. Dodger unwittingly witnessed Corzine and the Tarkin Initiative's field test of their new superweapon. Dodger vows revenge and takes on Buck's last request to spy on the meeting at Zyberez for the rebels. Buck returns to Roby and informs her that they are breaking Una out of Jabba's prison. Roby asks why, and he tells her because Una is their ticket on to Zyberez. To bust Una out of Jabba's prison, Dodger and Roby are joined by Zanny, a Force-sensitive charlatan, Lennox, a burly alien mechanic, and a fellow scoundrel friend named Will. They return to Jabba's prison, bust her out, and head to Zyberez. Zyberez is a mobile space station and a pleasure palace owned and run by the Baldemiro crime family. A playground of the rich and powerful, the outside looks industrial, but inside it's a wonderland of hedonism and excess. Production notes say Zyberez is visually a turn-of-the-century World's Fair meets Fellini meets George Miles meets Luna Park meets Weimar Republic Cabaret. It's like Disneyland for adults, a manufactured metropolis encased in a dome that creates the illusion of being in an actual city with an actual sky. Zyberez is a pleasure playground dedicated to gambling, live shows, food, drink, and other assorted illicit affairs. Within its dome, it houses casinos, a menagerie, an arena, restaurants, music halls, private rooms, and beautiful canals. And here you can see some Rancors being used in some kind of sporting event or gambling show or something that looks like it's not very nice to the Rancor. So back to the story. After busting Una out of Jabba's prison, the Ragtag crew cons their way onto Zyberez using Una's status to get them inside. As the crew enters Zyberez, they see gondolas slip by both in the water and into the air. Catering to the rich, the underworld elite, and imperial officers, it's a meeting place where powerful people can conduct private business mixed with pleasure. Entry to Zyberez is tightly controlled to protect the anonymity and exclusivity of its clientele. At one point in the game, Dodger and Una would jump from rooftop to rooftop as they traversed to get wherever they needed to go. Following Buck's words, the crew visits a nightclub where they see a performance by Chanteuse. Said Chanteuse is Buck's compatriot Ananda Sirena, who is also a Baldomero underboss. Ananda tips them off to the location and time of the meeting between Corzine and the Imperials. After following the tip, Buck eavesdrops on a secret meeting between Corzine and the Imperials and learns exactly what killed Buck and the villagers at Mos El Rey, a weaponized violaceous gas mined from the asteroid graveyard of Alderaan itself, a weapon of mass destruction grotesquely derived from the millions of voices suddenly silenced. The information from this meeting is meant to be something obscene. Not only the fact that it's mined from the bones of the Death Star's victims, but that it's engineered to eliminate one's enemies while leaving all the valuable property and real estate intact. When a snippy politician accuses Corzine of cozying up to the Emperor, Corzine boasts that she's in charge of the mining facility at the Alderaanian graveyard, and that she speaks of being in collusion with the Tarkin Initiative, a secret think tank within the Imperial Military Department of Advanced Weapons Research. Corzine reminds them she has fashioned the experimental bomb called the Death Blossom. With her asteroid-based refinery that processes and weaponizes the gas, she can make them all very rich and very powerful. Disgusted by the grotesque actions of Corzine and the Empire, the Ragtag group gathers the intel and runs for their lives when they're discovered spying. Our crew escapes Zyberez, but they are split up. During the commotion, Una is free to go. She served her purpose to the crew, but she is shaken by her mother's brutality, and she runs with Will, choosing to be a righteous scoundrel with the rest of them. After a space chase, Dodger and the others are being pursued by Imperial and Ring forces. They crash land on a remote marsh-like planet called Odo Fagi. I think that's how you pronounce it. Dodger and Zanny discover a derelict, once-thriving spice mining colony. The spice-addicted locals worship an albino hut named Mamo. Dodger and Zanny are captured and almost sacrificed to Mamo. Jedi mind tricks won't work on these spice-addicted zealots. Thankfully, Lennox rescues them from the cult. Odo Fagi keeps getting crazier. Dodger, Zanny, and Lennox flee and take refuge deep in the marsh. They eventually come to an old colonial plantation. Its lone resident is Major General Pilaf, who is dressed as a Clone Wars-era officer. Pilaf has a sole companion, a reprogrammed super battle droid named Isaac, IZK. Pilaf and Isaac learn that the Clone Wars ended 20 years ago. He's shocked to learn all this has transpired since his post began. Pilaf, armed to the teeth with Clone Wars-era weaponry, agrees to help Dodger stop Corzine. The Ragtag crew flies to Basher's Yard, a small moon-based salvage yard, to meet up with Will and Una. Basher's Yard is a moon-based truck stop and salvage yard located in the mid-rim. The place has gone to seed. It is wintry and desolate. Basher's Yard was once a thriving commercial destination and repair station that served as a stopping point for haulers and travelers moving between the colonies and the Outer Rim. It was abandoned after the destruction of Alderaan. The trade route was no longer traveled when the world was destroyed by the Death Star. The main building houses a repair bay, a diner, and a supply shop. A large yard behind contains stacks of broken ships and vehicles, creating a labyrinth of twisted metal. Will Nightstar has commandeered the place as a makeshift base of operations. When Dodger gets there, he discovers that Una is missing. Will is waiting there for Dodger. Sensing a trap, Dodger and Will get into a gunfighter stance, and it's a showdown. As the men square off, Dodger is informed by a monologuing Will that he has been working for Corzine the entire time. He was the trigger man who obliterated Buck's village for Corzine. Will has also turned Una back over to her mother and destroyed the intel before it could get to the rebels. Unknown to the comrades the entire time, Will is actually the heir to the now defunct Black Sun crime syndicate, and he has clandestine plans to return Black Sun to its former glory. Both men go for their guns, and Dodger uses his light whip to disarm Will and his blaster to shoot him in the face. The Ragtag crew then races from Basher's Yard to the graveyard of Alderaan itself to stop the weapon from proliferating throughout the galaxy. The Alderaanian graveyard is an asteroid field made up of the shattered remains of the planet itself, with many of the fragments still displaying details and ruins from the surface. The entire field is suffused with a purplish gas that formed after the destruction of the planet. There is a stillness and a haunted feeling to the location. Gamers would have actually flown the ship in this part of the game, and here you can see the interface for the space flight and combat. This is the site of Corzine's operation. The Ring and the Empire are mining the violaceous gas to weaponize it, so there are gas-gathering mining ships here, as well as an asteroid-based refinery facility. The asteroid field, ships, and facility are a key element to the game's final showdown. In the graveyard of Alderaan, Dodger and crew have a final clash with Corzine. They launch a coordinated attack, fighting simultaneously battles in space amidst the spectral asteroid field, using Clone Wars-era technology provided by Pilaf, and aboard a Ring mining vessel to rescue Una, and on the asteroid-based refinery to close down the operation once and for all. In the end, they emerge victoriously. The resultant explosion destroys the facility and ignites the gas throughout the Alderaanian graveyard, burning it away so that it can never be weaponized in the future. The events of our story force Dodger to come to terms with his survivor guilt and literally go home to the graveyard of Alderaan to confront the enemy and his past. In the end, it's his Alderaanian heritage and a biological resistance, but not immunity to the gas, that makes him uniquely able to take down the enemy and destroy the threat during the final conflict. At the climax of the story, the operation is destroyed and the resulting explosions burn off the remaining gas in the asteroid field, eliminating the threat forever. So as you can see or hear, it would have been a lot cooler to have played this game and to have experienced the story than to have heard it from a guy on YouTube. That said, it was a really well done story by Amy Hennig, and it's a shame that they didn't do something more with it, that they didn't take the story into another format, into a novel at least, or a graphic novel, or an animated one-off. It's a really good tale, and I think it's kind of sucks that we never got to experience, but I am glad that I was able to place it together and to share it with you, and I hope you enjoyed it for what it was, and I hope you can see where there are little story holes, like gameplay would have facilitated that, and some of the things that come to the story naturally would have been probably murmured to us by, an NPC as we walked by them or as we talked to them in the game. And there was a lot of crazy stuff that was planned, like the ATST chase and things like that have come out recently that just sound like they would have been a really, really fun single-player game. And it's a shame that we didn't get it, but I hope you enjoyed this video and make sure you subscribe to the channel. If I get any more information on Star Wars Ragtag, I'll make sure to share it with you. Thanks again for watching and reading MakingStarWars.net.